Okay, thank you. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Environment Select Committee. I am Councillor Will Pascal, the Chair of the Environment Select Committee. This meeting is being held in accordance with government regulations on holding virtual meetings. And please bear with us if we run into some technical challenges during the meeting, and I apologise for challenges at the beginning of the meeting. This meeting is being held via Microsoft Teams live conferencing, and all the committee members, council officers and parties who wish to participate in this hearing are joining from remote locations. The event is also being live streamed, and members of the public and the media are welcome to follow the meeting remotely and listen to the discussions taking place. I would like to welcome any first-time viewers to the Environment Select Committee. Firstly, I think it would be very appropriate for us to start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And if I may also ask that we remember all those who have suffered as a result of COVID, including, of course, Captain Sir Tom Moore, who passed yesterday. And I'd like to thank, on behalf of everybody here, all those who are supporting the community during this pandemic. Thank you. Before we proceed with the meeting, I would ask members of the committee to mute their microphones and only to unmute themselves when they are addressing the meeting. Once they are done, they should mute themselves again. Likewise, to save bandwidth, I would ask councillors only to switch on their cameras when speaking and remember to switch them off after they have spoken. If a councillor wishes to speak on a particular item and is not being called to speak, please indicate by typing the letter Q in the conversation or chat column by drawing my attention to speak up. And please do not use the conversation or chat column for any other comments, as they can be seen by all participants and they also retained. To assist your fellow councillors, officers and members of the public watching online to identify you, please state your name before you speak. If for any reason your connection drops and you miss something, please let us know. If my connection drops, I nominate Vice Chair Councillor Charles O'Connor to take over the meeting on my behalf until I'm able to come back. First item we must address, therefore, is attendance and declaration of interests. I have had one apology for not attending from Portia Thaxter, who I understand, Councillor Portia Thaxter, who I understand is suffering from tonsillitis. I hope that as much as I wish that she didn't have tonsillitis, I hope it remains to be a mild affliction and that we can welcome her back as soon as possible. And for those who are directly in touch with her, please would you pass on from all of us our wishes for her to get well soon and to stay safe in the meantime. I will now ask members one by one to confirm whether they are present and whether they have any interests to declare. Councillor Erin Naretti.
Good evening, Chair. Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Marwan El Nagi.
Good evening, Chair. I'm present and nothing to declare. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Alison Jackson.
Present and nothing to declare. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Charles O'Connor.
Present and nothing to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Laura Round. Is Councillor Laura Round with us or not?
Oh, I put on my camera.
I saw her, sir. Yeah.
I'm present and nothing to declare.
Thank you, Laura. That's great. We can see you now. Thank you very much. So that covers that item on the agenda. Thank you, everybody. Now, we've dealt also with declarations of interest, which is formally on the agenda. Next item is A3, minutes of the previous meeting. Minutes of the 8th of December 2020 meeting have been circulated, and I would like to ask the committee as to whether they feel these are a correct record and whether they would like me to sign them off as the correct record. So if anybody has any points they wish to raise, please raise them. Otherwise, I will take your silence as agreement. I therefore take the minutes as correct, and I will sign them off with the help of governance after the meeting as the correct record of the previous meeting. So that moves us on to item A4, which is headed Customer Service and Crest Update. Now, this is a slightly unusual item in the sense that we have asked for reports from 2 officers and the lead members thereby with regard to 2 areas of the council which are under the different lead member portfolios. Customer services as will be represented tonight by Councillor Mary Wheel and Sophie Ellis, and Crest is represented by Councillor Mary Will and Tim Davis. So I thought that maybe the first thing to do would be to ask the 2 lead members to give us their view, each of them and together, of how the delivery of these 2 services can take account of each other and provide a more joined up customer service from the council, both in terms of how it relates to the customer, the resident, but also in how we bring together the back office and the way in which we handle questions to the council. So maybe Mary Wheel, maybe you could lead off on this one for us.
Yes, I'm very happy to, Chairman. Slight caveat is that I was only asked to do this 15 minutes ago, so I hadn't had a chance to really prepare. But I suppose what I'd really like to and I will leave Sophie, I hope, to make even more sense. But the first thing I'd like to say about the customer access strategy really is obviously that it's a whole across the council change and policy and initiative. And I think the one that most affects us here, and certainly the interaction into Crest, is the third aspiration, which is to prioritise people over convenient organisational practice. And I think that's, you know, so often what happens is that it's easier if people follow this particular line and get handed off here and handed back here. And our customer access strategy is really seeking to change that way of thinking and doing. At the moment, we're at the stage of a sort of fairly high level implementation programme, but that will obviously involve colleagues in the Crest programme working closely with us to see how we can translate those aspirations into what actually happens in the back office, and how at an earlier stage in the transaction, the customer, the whole picture of what the customer is going to need is seen, and that people are tasked and respond and report accordingly. But I'm going to leave it at that and let Sophie pick up any pieces, or perhaps hand over to Emma now for her bit.
Before we go to Emma, if I could just interject and apologise that you were only asked 15 minutes ago.
That's fine.
I had hoped that you'd be given plenty of warning. When I had a bit of a pre-meet this afternoon with one of our governance officers, it turned out that there was some doubt as to whether you'd been asked. I think your answer is entirely hit the nail on the head, and detail can follow, as you said, with Sophie and Tim. But Emma, Will, would you like to speak from your point of view?
Yes, thank you. Quite brief, and I'm sure Sophie will give you a lot more detail on how this is all working in practice. But essentially, the CREST part, which is my responsibility, is a small part of a much bigger customer service transformation. And I think, in a nutshell, what I wanted to say about CREST is, as it currently stands, and I'm not sure this is completely captured by the report, we do have, on our website, you can make comments or requests about street cleaning or building works, or all sorts of things. And those go in and they are being dealt with. And what CREST has already achieved is the work that closer working behind in the departments is going on. What we haven't quite achieved yet, and what is work in progress, is a system whereby you put in an email saying they haven't done the rubbish, and you can access the see the information about how your what's happened to your. The best analogy I can give is like a parcel. When your parcel hasn't delivered and you want to find out what's happening with your parcel, when's it coming? That's what we're sort of aiming for, that you'll be able to put your complaint in, you'll be able to see what's happened to it and when it's been resolved. And I think it would be fair to say that's work in progress. Sophie, I'm sure, can give you the more detail on this. It's all about IT systems, which I don't pretend to understand. But we are moving from one system from another. In particular, we're moving shifting systems. So I think the way this is the plan, it will happen, but it isn't going to happen in sort of one big bang moment. It will happen over a course of months. And as I say, I'd probably best I let Sophie give you all the detail about how that's going to happen, and particularly the shift, I think, from moving netcall to dynamic. That's about as far as my technological knowledge goes, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. I have to say, I once followed an awful service, but with great transparency, when my passport went all the way to Poland via Switzerland and then back to where I was in France, because I could track and trace it the whole way. It was a brilliant experience in terms of transparency, but it was pretty dire in terms of the service. I know that all the services are much better in the council, but we do need to get that track and trace facility working. And I do appreciate it's not easy, it's not overnight, and it's a big job. But what I do take from the statement from both of you is that there is a culture between within the leadership team, and no doubt we're going to hear more in detail in a minute, of joining up the dots and working holistically across the council in the interests, as Mary said, of the customer first and foremost. So thank you very much indeed for that. I think Sophie.
Well,
Sophie,
just
sorry, yeah.
I think the thing I really want to stress is that the difference between your parcel is the parcel's being delivered, it's all happening. The only bit that's missing is that the customer, i.e. our residents, can't trace that. Yeah. They can't see it in real time, but it's the joined up working behind the scenes is going on. Yeah, that's actually the much bigger ask, getting all these different departments and you know about this to work together. So that is happening.
I know. It was in my portfolio when I was deputy leader.
I know that. It's so just that
it's a progress, a journey which is progressing well. And thank you very much for the encouraging signs of it going in a much more joined up way across the council. Now, I think if we could move on to Sophie Ellis to, as you both indicated, to give us an overview of how you see the council's wider plan working, and then we'll get Tim Davis to give us an update on how that link is happening into the subset, which is relevant specifically to this committee in terms of CREST. So Sophie, perhaps we could ask you to speak next.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members of the committee, and thank you, Councillors Will and Will, for that introduction. My name's Sophie Ellis. I'm the Director of Customer Delivery with Kensington and Chelsea, and I have worked with colleagues across the organisation to develop a customer access strategy, which is one of the papers that you have before you this evening and what we've been talking about. I think what we've tried to focus on with the strategy is an overarching aim to make sure that we increase our residents' confidence in the council to be able to deliver services to them effectively and build trust and confidence. And that really does mean that things like making sure it's easy for them to get what they need, it's easy for them to see where their progress updates are with a request they've already had. They are all really, really important elements of building that confidence in us as an organisation. So the strategy articulates some of what we want to achieve in order to get to that place where there's greater confidence in us as an organisation, and where our residents have a better experience in their interactions with us. It's not all about technology, because there's a lot in there about making sure that the experience people have if they choose to phone or come to see us is equally excellent. We are not removing face-to-face or telephone services. And yet even the improvement in those areas is highly technology dependent. It's really important that we have good technology that draws up processes within IT systems, so there's a reduction in manual intervention, and that will make the work of teams like Crest much easier, where they're already doing a lot of work behind the scenes to make sure there are that there is that joining up where a request cuts across a number of service areas. We want, as far as possible, to be able to make sure our systems do some of that work for officers. And that in turn, of course, makes sure that officers can then focus on the quality of interaction with residents and improve that relationship with residents. So we are looking at, as I say, technology is a significant dependency for this project or programme. We want to make sure that we've got more corporate systems rather than fragmented systems across the organisation, so that there's more chance that what we've got about individual residents and their various requests sits in one place, and we have a kind of one version of truth around that, and that makes it easier for us to join those processes up end to end. And that also we are looking at how those processes work with individuals and with residents, so that they're redesigned with residents in mind. So as Councillor Will said, we are looking at building some of that new infrastructure at the moment, and that work is underway, and that will allow an improvement to online services as well as face-to-face and telephone. So as an example of that, we would hope that our My RBKC account would start to look much more better and much more intuitive and have more options available to residents. And we're also at the moment looking at some of the kind of service requests and online options and transactions that sit within My RBKC to look at how they could be improved from a customer's perspective. And we're doing some very specific research around that with customer experience experts and residents. And I think all of that leads to what Councillor Will was expressing, is the need to make sure that where residents transact with us, what they transact with is a single organisation, and it doesn't feel fragmented for them. So the way we're organised, because we're a large entity, doesn't feel confusing or frustrating to residents. They have a single view of the council, which is equally as important as us having a single view of our residents. So I think they're the kind of key elements. I suspect that rather than me talk a lot, you might prefer that I take questions so that I can focus in the areas that are particularly of interest. Would that be the appropriate way to discuss the proposals?
I think so, but I think what I'd like to do, bearing in mind this is to a certain extent a working from the macro to the micro, maybe that's not that wide a range, but could Tim Davis introduce his area first, because I think what particularly interests us is to how things are working together. Obviously, the span of your work goes way outside the competence of this Environment Select Committee. But it's the interaction between Tim's, the Crest area, and the way in which customer services works overall in the council that is of interest. It's the journey of Crest into the overall one system in the council is maybe a way of putting it. So could I ask Tim Davis if you could present your paper next, and then if we could come back to questions to both of you.
Yeah, hi, good evening. For those that don't know me, I'm Head of Environmental Health Residential and Head of Crest for the time being. Hopefully you've had a chance to flick through the extra couple of sheets of information that went along with Sophie's reports, and on the basis that you have, I'll skip the new customer services offer because Sophie has covered that, and I'd like to just take a couple of minutes to really ram home that there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes, that the teams are working together. Crest is 6 teams officially, the noise and nuisance team, the wardens, the parts police, the construction management team, waste and street scene enforcement, and the just messed that one up, the guys that look after the holes in the road and monitor the licenses, so the highways enforcement team as well. In the main, noise and nuisance, construction management team, the wardens and the waste and street scene enforcement teams they are taking most of the pressure in terms of the customer service requirements, the customer service requests, the complaints, etc. that come in. And they are the teams that are working closer together. And they've got the biggest presence, for example, at the weekends and out of hours. In that process, we highlighted a couple of sort of points where bizarrely busking and begging are on the increase at the moment, despite the fact it's lockdown. Noise and nuisance officers can't always sort of get to deal with buskers quickly enough. The uniform presence of the wardens are great to do that, and the waste and street scene enforcement guys also get involved. And it also helps us gather information and possibly take action against people who are breaching the PSPO in the Knightsbridge area, particularly for the busking side of things. We did loads of work and we'll continue to do work when lockdown lifts with the tables and chairs, helping businesses, making sure they don't spill out where they shouldn't be, etc., but in a supportive way, and also gathering information if there are people that are so not complying with the terms of their license. And then, COVID is what's driving everything at the moment, across environmental health, across the Crest team, and then across other teams that are out there front facing. So, Crest teams are helping with the licensing side of linking up with the environmental health officers. The Crest officers link up with the licensing enforcement officers. They're helping out with the markets office, the officers working in the Porterville Road Market, etc. And then when the schools go back, they'll be back out checking on the road closures and all the school drop-offs and things. It's really difficult at the moment to get really excited because it's generally quiet. At night, the noise and nuisance team are not rushed off their feet, and that's a good thing. But it has been successful and continues to be successful, and that's probably enough of me going on about that. So I'm happy to step back and answer questions. But my last point would be where the point was made that the new customer service is there to prioritise people rather than the organisational priorities. I think where we're going in Crest is to get to this magic point where maybe we don't need the people, because every officer will spot the issue and every officer in the Crest team will either deal with it or know how to get it dealt with before it even becomes a problem to a resident.
Thank you very much, Tim. As I said earlier on, I think one of the areas that we want to look at is how your team is working increasingly with Sophie's team and work area. But Alison Jackson, you wanted to ask a question in this area particularly.
Yes, thank you very much. So thank you for that. And it's great to hear what you're doing. And Emma, I'm very pleased that everything's working on a more digital basis, because I suppose what I had to say is that that it's anything to make the council more accessible is important, and build that trust and confidence in the help and services. And at the moment, you know, obviously it's more difficult for people to use the council, use the website. You know, I wouldn't want to say it's always the last company you want to contact, but it's, you know, it's on the back burner. You know, you say that customers are made to, you know, feel inferior and not treated with respect, or feel that they're, and, you know, by phone, you know, you get the wrong information, the wrong person. And I just think a whole build on kind of digital with indexes, how-to guides. So if you want to get a license, it's very, very simple how to get a license or how to find something, which I know you've touched on. But, you know, I really welcome that. And then on the secondly to that, you know, on page 12, I was dismayed to hear that the officers are struggling to show empathy and compassion to the residents who are effectively customers. And I just wondered if you thought about hiring different personality types so that you've got customer-facing personnel, more commercial style, so that you're not solely relying on training and management of you've got a different style of approach. So it's customer first, council second. So it's changing a whole hiring system where you do have to have people at the front, and that'll always be the case. So that was really my question and my thought on that.
Would either the lead members or the officers like to come back and comment on that?
I'm happy to take that, Chair.
Thank you, Sophie.
If you like. So yes, I think Councillor Jackson, that's a really good point, and I suppose it speaks to my thoughts about why this isn't only about digital or online services. Whilst they are a very core part of it, it's also about the experience people have when they speak to any of our officers, but certainly ones who are designated to support at the first point of contact, that the quality of that interaction is excellent. What we're doing, I suppose we're taking a multi-faceted approach at this. The first thing to do is to make sure everybody gets the training and there's a clear expectation for officers across the organisation about the quality of contact that we expect our residents to experience. So you start, don't you, by setting out the expectation and making sure that that is really clear. And then we're also now about to start some work to understand what the obstacles are for our staff potentially in adopting those behaviours, those skills in their interaction. And if it's a lack of training, we've developed a number of potential training streams that we're exploring at the moment. If it's about the equipment, which it may be, then we're exploring how that can support and improve the quality of interaction. If you'll indulge me, there's just one kind of story I have that I've carried with me over the last year or so. My neighbour took a job as a greeter for Marks and Spencer's, and she went through a programme of about 6 weeks of training in customer service. It was really intensive, and she talked to me about it a lot, and it sounded really interesting. And then I kind of said to her at the end, what was it that you found most powerful in that? What's been the kind of best thing? And she said to me, the best thing, apart from all the training, the best thing they've done is they've given me a little handheld device, and when a customer asks me a question, I can get the information I need there and then in my hand to answer them. And what that means is I can focus on the person in front of me. I don't have to, you know, worry about where I'm going to find the information or holding it in my head or who I have to go and speak to. And it's a simple story, but for me it was very powerful because it described the importance of the tools that we give our colleagues, our staff, to be able to have those quality interaction with residents. So I think inevitably that if people cannot, we need to recruit when we're rewriting our job descriptions to make sure we recruit with the right skill set. We need to support with training and equipment. but ultimately people will need to deliver what the organisation requires of them, or of course then they would not be suitable for the role. So I think that's the approach we're taking to make sure that we get the quality of interaction that we expect as an organisation. I hope that's answered your question and is helpful.
Thank you, Sophie, very much. Is any other member of the committee like to come in with a question on this subject? I think what I would like first of all to thank both lead members, particularly Mary at short notice, but Emma obviously as well, and Sophie and to Tim. I appreciate there's lots of work going on. You say a lot of it's not to do with IT, but unless the IT does work, it is much too visible. Once it really works, it becomes invisible and a great support, as you've indicated. And I think the acid test to me is when we can take the title of customer services and just chop off the last S, and it becomes customer service as opposed to customer services. I think it's a customer-driven thing rather than a organisation producer of services. And I think that's the culture change there seems to be embedded in the argument that's been put forward by all four of you, and we really welcome that. I think that there are difficulties at the practical level, as I understand it, of connecting up the systems between the Crest has developed, which have got some excellent merits, and the use of Power BI and mapping and so on has been very useful. I know it's used elsewhere in the council, but I've seen it very strongly used in Crest. And joining up their systems with the new incoming systems in the council. Now, I know there's a decision in the KD and all the rest of it's gone through to fund the upgrade of the system and so on. Can you give us any indication of the timescale before we see an implementation of the new overall system and the better joining up with what Crest are doing at the moment?
A timescale for the complete implementation I don't have yet. We've got some work going on at the moment to explore that. But what we are doing is some very immediate work. I think we've learned through COVID how to work at pace and take opportunities where they exist and do what we can when it's right in front of us. And that's been a very powerful lesson certainly for me as an officer from working through COVID. So one of the opportunities we had is that, as Councillor Will mentioned, our current provider of our MyRBKC platform, the contract was coming to an end in February. Rather than extend that when we knew we wanted something to move on to a better, more integrated system for the organisation, we've decided to work at pace to replace that with the beginnings of a larger corporate system, and that will be done by around March, we believe. We've got a very short extension should we not meet that deadline to build some flexibility. And as part of that transition onto the other platform, we're looking to improve usability as far as possible. It won't be a complete redesign because we've had to compromise in time. February is a short deadline, but it's an opportunity for us to work in a quite agile way, take those elements there, improve them, and then we'll move on to the next piece. And in the meantime, our colleagues in IT are working. Of course, we have a by-borough IT service, and we're looking to make sure we exploit any efficiencies by working with similar technology to other organisations, so that we're working in a very efficient way. So we're working on building a longer-term vision for the platform that continues to work through all of our services and improve them. But certainly for what we see already on MyRBKC, our account, we'll expect to see some improvement, and that on our new platform by around March. And then we'll just continue to work through that. And I think that we should see a more detailed implementation plan for other elements over the coming weeks as we kind of move up towards that March deadline.
Okay, if I could repeat my thank you to the four of you and ask if we could have an update as appropriate at our next select committee meeting, and governance will be in touch with you to be around the details of that. But thank you very much indeed. And I think that unless anybody's got any points to the contrary, I would like to pass on to the next item, which is A5. A5, the green plan. So the purpose of the green plan, as has been exemplified to me, is that it provides a high-level introduction to the council's response on the 2030 commitment. Now, the two people involved in presenting to us here are lead member Councillor Johnny Thalasitis and Terry Oliver, who's the officer who's leading this. So, Johnny, if you could perhaps, I think, Johnny, if you could explain particularly to enlighten our members, we had historically an environment sustainability strategic plan, which has in effect morphed into the Green Plan. If you could explain for the benefit of the committee, first of all, your objectives in doing that, and then how you see the Green Plan as we have it, and then Terry can tell us a bit more detail, and we can have questions thereafter. So, Johnny, if you could speak first, that'd be great. Do we have Johnny with us?
Chair, he's just sent me a message saying he's having some Wi-Fi problems.
Right. Okay. Terry, if you could perhaps take us through the paper briefly, yep. And hopefully Johnny can then join us. If we leave the
Johnny,
you're
here. I've rejoined on my phone. My Wi-Fi cut out at the crucial moment. I sat through A4 very patiently and then found at the critical moment I had lost connection.
We tried to start your item on time, but anyway, the point I was trying to make, if you didn't get it, is that there has been a bit of a, I don't know, strategic or philosophical change between the environment's sustainability to strategic plan, which we had tables in previous meetings, withdrawn from the previous one, and this has now been morphed into the Green Plan for the slightly different purpose. So we'll get Terry to run us through the paper in a bit more detail in a minute. But if you could start off by explaining to the committee your objective as you took this on and how you wanted this restructured and the role of this paper and what its purpose is, that would be very good.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Will. So I took this on a couple of months ago, and it was the environmental sustainability strategy. And I thought that whilst there was a lot of really good work that had gone into it, I felt that it probably wasn't focused in terms of its purpose sufficiently. I wanted something that was either explicitly internally focused on the processes and the work streams that are happening within the council, or that was external and could be easily understood by residents. I think what the Green Plan has become is probably closest to the latter. It's I'm hoping that it will serve as a bit of an umbrella, so that if you want to know what's happening, in terms of our climate emergency pledge and hitting net zero, you can go to the Green Plan and find anything you want to find. So whether it's our air quality action plans or our biodiversity plans or whatever it is, or a specific commitment or target that we're hoping to hit, then this acts as a catch-all. And then for those people who do want to really drill down on the detail, they can click through, they can read those plans and grill me further. But hopefully this is a more engaging document with a couple of new pledges in it that gives us the opportunity to build towards, well, I think as we say in the document, build back better towards 2030.
Okay, so that lays out the general strategic point. Terry, if you'd like to take us through briefly the paper
Sure.
And highlights in that, and then we'll go to questions.
Thank you, Councillor. So there's a huge amount of work that the council's doing around kind of environment and environmental sustainability, and it is quite a complex and broad subject area. So as Johnny said, it was looking at pulling that together in a really kind of concise, easily understood way, and that's why we've got the Green Plan, and it really sets out what the council's environmental vision is, and that's set out in the plan there: a cleaner, greener, healthier and safer borough where people love to live, work and visit. It sets out the 5 environmental priorities as well, which community fed into over the summer as part of the COVID-19 impact survey as well. So we've got carbon reduction and climate change, air quality, fuel poverty, biodiversity and waste minimisation. And they're the kind of 5 priorities, and underneath those are some really detailed work streams and work that's going on and work plans. So there's a lot of really good work that's being progressed for each of those or environmental priority leads. And there's a lot of work that's coming out over the spring and being consulted on. Alongside that, we've also linked in the green recovery. And as we said, it's about building back better, and we've set some priorities around that as well. And what we wanted to do was kind of review all the environmental work that is being conducted by the council, also review the targets and kind of priorities that have already been set, and put those into one concise document. So we've got some really easy, they're ambitious, but they're easy to understand targets and priorities for each of those environmental priorities that we've got, and clearly sets out what we aim to achieve and by when. So we've tried to make it as smart as possible, so it's measurable, and we can actually report our progress on that. So the document that was attached with the report is the working draft at the moment. So it's mainly the content that we wanted to show you today. The actual design and layout is with our design team at the moment, so they've got to do their magic and stuff and make it into a nice presentable document. And then we aim to launch that later this month if we can, if not in March. Alongside that, the report picks up the Green Fund that has been agreed now as well, and that's a £1 million capital pot. So there's £1 million available for the next 10 years, and that's to deliver kind of exciting new added value type projects, which really help deliver the Green Plan priorities. And what we hope to achieve in 2022 as well is kind of open that up to external community groups and residents as well, so they can help bid for that and help achieve some of our 2030 and 2040 targets. So that's a really quick summary of the Green Plan.
Okay, thank you very much, Terry. If I could ask Charlie O'Connor, you wanted to ask a question first here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you very much, Johnny and Terry. I'm interested to hear how you describe the purpose of this document, and I broadly welcome the document. I think, I suppose, I'll be interested to see how it progresses. I hope it's closely linked to the documents that contain a bit more detail, because I hope otherwise, or I have a concern otherwise, that we might be accused of sort of headline grabbing, putting out a perhaps slightly anodyne document without any detail. And it might be good to have it as the sort of preface, if you like, to some more detailed descriptions of how we'll meet the aims contained within it. And then just one rather sort of silly point, but I hope we're not going to use that admittedly rather sweet how can you help document at the front, or drawing at the front. I mean, it is very sweet, but it contains about 6 spelling mistakes. It's probably done by a 3-year-old or something, but yeah, that's just my thoughts.
Yeah. Well, we did say that we wanted the document to be accessible, so that we've charged a 3-year-old with drafting the cover is a great sign of that, I should think. But our minds are not closed to new ideas, and I think we probably will return to that front page and see if we can find a better image. And likewise, if we can crowdsource one from tonight's committee meeting, I'm very happy to do so. I think the question you raised is probably the most reasonable one available to scrutineers tonight, that this document fails to have sufficient detail. Certainly what I tried to say in my opening remarks was that this was an umbrella. Perhaps a signpost is another way of looking at it. It very much isn't the totality of what we intend to do, and there are going to be more detailed documents that flow from it. I'm sure Terry can talk more to them, but from my perspective, the ambition is certainly that this document is really only an introduction rather than the sort of the storybook itself.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlie. Erin Naretti, you wanted to ask a question.
Thank you, Chairman. Maybe I think Laura wants to go first if she...
Thank you.
Right, okay, that's fine. I'm happy with that. Laura, you go first.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to ask Councillor Felicity. Oh my God, Johnny, I'm going all funny with your name. I'm so sorry. Can I ask Johnny about the commitment to build a new Riverside Park, and just if you could provide a bit more information around that, please?
Absolutely, Laura. That's a fantastic question, and you're clearly one of the most eagle-eyed members of the committee. That is one of the new commitments contained in the Green Plan, and it's one that I'm really excited about. It's a pledge to build a Riverside Park with a sports facility on Cremorne Wharf, the current Thames Tideway site down by Lots Road. This is an area that I think has been underserved for green space over a course of decades now, probably since the introduction of the Wales End Estate. And I hope that we can go some way towards correcting that and giving them a new green space in the heart of the community to sit alongside some of the development that we're expecting there over the coming years. I think it's probably the most tangible commitment, and certainly the newest one contained in the document. And the ambition is certainly to consolidate all operational uses on Cremorne Wharf that are currently there and move them where possible, so that we can maximise the footprint of this new park, and with any luck, a five-a-side pitch too.
Councillor Naretti, would you like to follow on?
Thank you, Chairman. Just quickly, Chairman, looking at the adopted priorities, if you look at carbon reduction, air quality, fuel poverty, biodiversity, they all looks good. We've been talking about these things for about a year, and the plan looks good. The overall commitment looks good. The overall ambition looks good. But just to be mindful from the residents' perspective that not to take radical decisions just because you have pressure from groups, external groups that want to lobby on things that they think that's appropriate for the groups, but not for a wider population. So not like stopping cars or, just building, I don't know, barricades, not turn to, driving kind of thing. So just to be mindful. So as long as you do your research based on comprehensive, realistic, logical, and obviously shouldn't trouble people's lives is very important. So that's what I want your focus to be on, so that we make sure that it doesn't disrupt the communities, it doesn't disrupt any residents. Also we evolve and then develop and then move forward. So that's just my comment and advice. So I hope you take it.
I absolutely are, and I can see exactly why you got more votes than me at the last election. You really are the voice of Holland. I should think that every resident in our ward wants us to strike the right balance between our environmental commitments and sort of not troubling residents' lives overly and making sure that we listen to people. There is often pressure from pressure groups and from social media, and I think the most important thing to do is to continue consulting locally with the people that are affected by our policies. My aim is certainly to do that, to keep listening to local people and to make sure that we strike the right balance in everything that we do.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else wish to ask a question from the committee? Because I've got one I'd like to ask, but okay. First of all, I'd like to welcome the commitment to Cremorne Park. I have to declare an interest since I have a business in Lots Road, but having some green in addition to the park up by King's Road will be very welcome indeed, particularly in view of the massive developments that are happening on the Riverside. I think it'd also be worth seeing.
You're quite right, Councillor Pascal. Hammersmith and Fulham have built at a density that's entirely inappropriate for the surrounding area.
Yeah, but there's also we'll have to see how it plays out. But there's also I understand a whole swathe of development going to happen on the north, south, and east-west branches of Lots Road itself in our borough. In addition, it may be at a slightly different density, but that's going to be interesting to follow going forward. But I think having a park there would be very welcome. The thing that I'm still concerned about this paper, and I think it will evolve, because I think if this is going to be the customer-facing, introductory, high-level, first port of call document, one of the things that I presume it will do is there a question whether it will act as a signposting exercise. For you referred earlier that you could zoom in after or drill down, your phrase, having read this document, pick the area you're interested and then drill further. So I think that as this develops in the future, could you confirm that will be the case, that one of the aims of future development of this paper as it evolves will be to provide lots of links out of this so that you can take you to other documents as they evolve?
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a good point. This document isn't intended to be the fountain or the font of all environmental knowledge within the borough, but I certainly see it as a web-facing piece that sort of you click a hyperlink and you go to that more detailed piece of work that sits behind it.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that tackling the front page and also as perhaps a slightly more serious issue is I do feel still that this document does not indicate, and this doesn't have to be in some great spreadsheet, but it doesn't indicate the scope and scale and pace that's required to achieve both the 2030 and 2040 commitments that we've made as a council. We are now, as it is, about 15 or nearly 18 months in from that commitment, and we only have, whatever it is, 8.5 years left to achieve our 2030 target. This is a very, very steep learning curve that we're going to need to go through. We won't have the outcome from, as I understand, one of the main things that's going to back up this, would I be correct that the carbon neutral report from Ether is going to be one of the bedrock things to take us further into what I would say is scope, scale and pace, that they'll give the foundations and the data needed to exemplify it. But that may be in a more detailed document. But I think the sense of that needs to come through to this, because reading this or looking at it, it doesn't give any sense of real urgency. I think that you've only got to look at David Attenborough's or hear David Attenborough's latest introduction to his latest issue of the Planet Earth, where he says, and I'm plagiarizing this and getting it entirely wrong and not presenting it very well, but it's something along the lines of that this was a perfect planet until Homo sapiens came along, and then that created certain issues. And he went on to sort of illustrate that unless we sort out the problems that we've caused, Gaia, as it used to be called in this sort of side of the business, is going to spit us out. And maybe, COVID is one of those warning shots of that process. So we do need to really get a sense of urgency into what we're trying to do. I know as a council we're battened down on COVID at the moment, quite rightly, and there's no argument coming from here at all about that. But in this document, it's got to start hinting at, there's an end stop in 2030 by which certain things are going to have to be done. And there's an end stop in 2040 by another series of things are going to have to be done. And that's before the effect of the Glasgow conference, the white paper and the London plan come to bear on our policies as well. So there's going to be a bigger headwind coming our way in terms of timescale. And I just don't feel yet that there's any real zip and vigor into this. There's no punch. It's all motherhood and apple pie at the moment. By flagging and linking to other documents, am I getting some pictorial sense of where we need to go by when? Because it's an absolute commitment we've made, and that's a good sort of statement. But if we're going to achieve it, we have to reverse engineer from that to now and have a hard-nosed program of how we're going to achieve it. So by when, how much, and what are we doing this year? We're waiting for the Ether report till March. Well, that's 18 months into our 10-year program.
Yes, no, and thank you, Will, for that question. I know that we met offline to discuss the sort of this embryonic green plan when it was first being, put together. And one of the comments you made was quite similar. It was around the need to express the urgency and the pace of the task. And I know that as a result of that, in the introduction of our document, we do talk about the scale, the complexity, the urgency of the challenge ahead being unprecedented, and therefore meeting it with unprecedented and sustained levels of focus, effort, and pace. So we have taken steps to address that very reasonable point, but I take on board that perhaps we can go further. And subsequent to this meeting, I'm content to look at that offline with Terry.
I think what I'm going for is that if you had something, the council's carbon footprint, that's its own carbon footprint, will be 0 by 2030. The council's current carbon footprint is X. Divide by 10, crudely, or 9 as it is now. It's 9 now, it's not 10. How much do we have to do every year? If you take the council housing stock, for instance, that's 1,000 a year for Doug Goldring to achieve. He's grappling with, he's able to achieve the Lac West one. He's grappling with how to, augment the HRA to get the next programme of things through. He's trying to balance demands from the lead members on the housing side and development side of Kim Taylor-Smith with GEMS and yours. It was GEMS and now it's your requirement to achieve 2030. It is very difficult to know how these circles are going to be squared, or squares are going to be circled, or whatever you want to call it. There's no pace and cadence indicated in here. It is a big task, we know that, but it's stated qualitatively. There's nothing, and I'm not talking about a spreadsheet here, but the shape of the curve. We all watch the telly almost every night, seeing whether, the terrible number of people in hospitals is actually flattening out the curve or not, because that is driving our lives or constraining our lives at the moment. It's the shape of things, it's the culture of things that's not coming through this enough. I think there needs to be some pictorial representation that really indicates that we've smelt the coffee. I think that people inside this program have smelt the coffee, but since you have targeted this strategically targeted this paper to aim to our customers, our residents, the question is, when they read this, will they think that we've actually smelt the coffee? I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, that's certainly something we can take away and look at how to express. I think we are all Sir David Attenborough in this borough when it comes to the environment these days, and we want to match the ambition that our residents have on it.
I mean, Sir David Attenborough very nearly said, let's get out and get rid of people. He didn't quite say that, but he said people are going to have to change pretty fast.
Yeah.
No, anyway, I think I got the message across that I think there's nothing to complain about in this paper, but it needs a little bit more zip and vigor in it. And plus the next growth phase is work in progress. The next bit will be the links through to the subsidiary documents, or the bigger documents, more technical ones. Should be good. So thank you very much. Any other members of the committee wish to say any other points on this, or can I say thank you to Johnny for this paper and move on to greening SPD? Now, on greening SPD, I think this is an enormous document, and I think the first thing that I'd like to say is a big thank you to the people who've put this together, because it took me and anybody else who's read it from cover to cover quite some time, I would very much like to thank officers for doing a sterling piece of work. It's in a fast-changing field, as we all know, because of the incoming London plan, and probably that's going to get reinvigorated, as I said just now, by the white paper and by whatever comes out of the Glasgow International Conference on climate change. Johnny, would you like to lead off on this one too first?
Yeah, absolutely. And can I begin by echoing your thanks to officers who have put this paper together, because I do think it's very good indeed, and that's been the feedback from stakeholders right the way through the consultation so far. We met with Extinction Rebellion, in fact, last week, and I think even they were broadly positive about the direction of travel in this paper. And I think, by way of introduction, I would one of the things I would say is that this is, we talked in the last paper about potentially a lack of detail and a lack of information, but in fact, this will be one of the subsidiary documents that flows from it. And so hopefully the depth into which this goes and the information it contains begins to persuade members of the committee that indeed sitting behind that green plan is a hell of a lot of work and a total grasp of the need to act with pace and vigor and all the rest of it. On the specific on the paper itself, I think what it does give us is we can't set new policy through an SPD. That has to wait for the local plan. But this has given us the opportunity, right at the moment at which we're producing a new local plan, to gather and generate a fantastic evidence base that can inform that piece of work. So I think that's been some of the unseen work behind the scenes that will stand us in best stead. In the greening SPD in itself, I think some of the most attractive points in it are around the retrofitting, in listed buildings and things, and hopefully to come an even stronger commitment to electric vehicles, because I note some comments that have been made at full council last week, and I have to say I quite agree with them that we need to push developers to go even further on that front. So that's probably all introduction.
John Wade, would you like to pick out any particular points out of the? I mean, it is a tome, I think would be the right way of describing this. But from an officer and expertise point of view, is there anything particularly you'd like to draw our attention to?
Well, I think probably it's right to say it's a planning document, and clearly a planning document is really based on delivery. So, we have to make sure that when we come up with a document like this, that it's very much based on a robust evidence base that Councillor Thalasitis has already referred to. But it's also really there. I think what we've tried to do is to express as concisely as we can to a very wide audience over the whole of the green sphere about what's important and what we're covering here. So this will be used not only for developers of large schemes going to the size of our opportunity areas, but also for residents to look to do some improvements to their own properties in terms of retrofitting. I think it's worth saying that not everything in this document necessarily requires planning permission. So, we've tried to reflect best practice here. And clearly things like fabric first, refurbishment, which are appropriate, don't always require permission. But what we have tried to do is set out a template for how any potential developer for whatever scheme is coming forward, whether it's small or very large, is very clear about what our expectations are. And I hopefully we've done that. As I've said, it is a long document, but then there's a lot to cover. So perhaps, it's appropriate for its length. I'm very happy. I mean, it obviously follows the energy hierarchy. So we start with being lean, we then go on to being green, and then we go on to monitoring and being seen. So it's set out deliberately in that way. And I suppose the first principle of the circular economy, and explaining that hopefully in fairly simple terms to kick off the document, I think is really important, because the circular economy, where you're actually reusing, recycling, really is the sort of first principle before looking at moving on down the energy hierarchy. So I think we've done that. As Councillor Thalasitis has said, this isn't setting new policy. We can't do that through an SPD. But what it is reflecting is the new London plan policy, and the evidence base that we've got, we will be developing further as part of the local plan. But I think this provides a very good introduction over a broad spectrum of different issues that are part of the greening agenda. Thank you very much. Now,
Charlie O'Connor, you also wanted to speak first on this one, so can I ask you to pose your question now?
Yes, thank you very much. Sorry, I was struggling with my computer. I also think it's broadly a very good document, and I'm grateful to officers for all the work that's gone into it. There's always a but, and I know I go on a lot about trees and electric vehicle charging and air conditioning units, and I don't want to appear querulous on the topic, but I do just want to observe that of a 120-page document, there are 4 lines devoted to tree retention, and I just want to reiterate in this forum that I think it is of such huge importance to our residents. It's the first thing that people think of when people talk about greening. It's the first thing shown in the photograph at the beginning of this document on pages 1 and 3. It is of huge importance to the borough, and in my experience, we don't do quite enough on tree protection. I realise that's probably something that we can't change in this document because that might require a policy change, but I just don't think we say enough about it. I don't think it's significant enough. It is literally the last paragraph before the glossary in the document, tree retention. So I think it just needs to be made more prominent, and that will demonstrate our commitment to our existing tree stock. I'm not going to go on about electric vehicle charging because I discussed that the other day in full council, and I'm glad it's all been noted and taken on board, and I'm grateful. With air conditioning units, I don't know how much coverage that gets in the document. I don't think very much, and I know that they're items of concern to residents, and they may become even more relevant when people start to install heat pumps, which I think effectively use, certainly air source heat pumps have some of the same issues, and there are fans involved, and it can cause disturbance to residents, and there are issues about people putting fans and pumps at the ends of their garden to put them negative effects on neighbours rather than the people who they're cooling or heating. So I think that is something that we might want to touch on in the document. And I also don't want to tread too much on Alison Jackson's toes. I think she may be going to mention a point about existing building stocks, but I'm conscious that this document applies to properties that come before the planning system, as I understand it, and a lot of the building stock in the borough will not come before the planning system over the coming years, and so I wondered whether there's any way that the principles in this document can be applied to our existing building stock. That's it.
Johnny and John, would you like to come back?
Yeah, I'm very happy to, Will. And can I totally, at the risk of sort of poacher becoming gamekeeper mid-meeting, I have to say it's a very helpful intervention from Councillor O'Connor. I agree with him that trees are the lungs of our city. And my challenge to officers, which I've made privately, but I'm happy to restate in a public forum, is that I do want the strongest possible protections on trees. And I certainly would like us to look at tree protection before we adopt a final greening SPD, just to make sure that there isn't anything more that we can do. And that when it comes to assessing them in the new local plan, again, we must take the strongest possible line on them. I'm very pleased that in some of the schemes that we're already working on, we are planting trees. Chelsea Green is a good example. I think we're looking at an uplift of 12 trees there. Likewise, in Redcliffe Ward, we're looking at tree planting on a couple of residential streets that should have a similar number. And Charlie will know that in fact, he's leading in Holland in our ward, potentially on doing something on one or two of our streets too. So there's certainly an ambition to plant more trees. There is a desire to do more to protect them that I put the challenge to officers with, and on electric vehicles and things, the comments are indeed noted, and I again, I concur with them, frankly.
Thank you, Johnny. Can I ask Alison Jackson to speak next?
Yes, thank you very much. And great to see that document, but I just have a few points because, by 2040, 2030, private developments will have to be in line with the requirements of the SPD. Yet the planning committee, which I'm on, currently accepting passing application for bills which will be, built potentially in 2025, 26, will last well into 2040. And the actions and recommendations of the SPD need to be sort of actioned now, because we're not really raising this, in those planning application committee meetings. So it's already late. And to be built into the decision making for the planning applications. The environmental topics are barely considered in our meetings. And then to touch on what Charlie O'Connor was saying is that, all buildings, these are the ones that we just see, but, electric charging banks and stuff encouraged to go into companies that are rebuilding car parks and stuff like that. All of those sort of things, really need to be discussed and encouraged now, because otherwise 2030 is going to be there. So that's one question that I'd like to raise. The other thing is just about retrofits, and that, I have concerns on the enforcement of those policies, particularly for private developments. And, how will the council carry out the investigations and surveys in the aftermath of COVID? And how will the fines stop large commercial developments who simply have the money budgeted in and they won't really have to, it doesn't matter to them whether they change or not. What kind of timelines and things are in place and enforcements, and the council, how will you ensure that the offsetting and resistance to retrofit really is a last resort and not just the result of loopholes falling by unnoticed. Now, sorry, one other point, just Councillor for Riverside, I was shocked that in this extensive document, the river is barely mentioned at all, and it's a major waterway artery in that area. Flooding, biodiversity, greening services are major issues in the SPD. And, as new developments continue in the Riverside area. And I just feel the SPD has let the river down. Are we able to see any actions and objectives to the river? And what kind of provisions will be added to support the river and residents, from the river?
Johnny.
Yeah, well, thank you, Alison, for that series of questions. I certainly want the planning committee to approve the greenest possible development for the borough. And that's precisely why we want to get the greening SPD adopted, so that as soon as possible it can carry material weight in the decision-making process and it can become a consideration for members. I perfectly appreciate that it's difficult for committee members to account for things that haven't been written into SPDs up until now. They can't use those as particularly material considerations. So I think that in a sense speaks to the urgency of adoption of this document. On the enforcement point, I certainly think that, and John may want to add to this, but I certainly think that we want to, and we will continue to enforce regardless of ownership, to safeguard our borough the best way that we possibly can. And on the river, I think it certainly forms part of our consideration of hydrology and flood protection. It's an asset that we continue to safeguard and respect. We are producing a Thames Conservation Area management plan in conjunction with you, Alison, and board members that I think will give strong and stable guidance to all of those along the Riverside. And likewise, just to declare a personal interest, not formally, so to speak, but in the Riverside, I am North West London's rep on the Thames Regional Flood Committee. So it's certainly something that I'm alive to is that our Riverside is one of the most loved parts of the borough, particularly in your ward, Alison, and it is never far from my mind.
Thank you very much. Now, could I ask Councillor Marwan Al Naghi to ask a question in this context?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks for this positioning paper. I recognize the complexity of the whole interrelated principles and planning to go into it. If I look at 3.4, for example, in the supplementary planning documents on reducing waste and supporting circular economy principles, I'm really interested in the operations. Is there anything there to highlight the operations mechanism or process into this? For example, identifying what type of waste we are trying to look at. How do we quantify it? When we are looking at the support of the circular economy principles, how this is going to be achieved. I've looked at the documents, it's quite extensive there, but how the two are matched in terms of waste management. So I will appreciate a little bit of elaboration, Chair, on this. Thank you.
Johnny, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I may bring in John or Terry, as we are, of course, by borough on the waste. But I would only note that I think it speaks to the breadth and the value of this document, that we've gone from being by the water on the last question to waste in this. We really have covered a lot of topics here. And Terry or John, do you want to come in on this one?
Probably just saying in the document, it purposefully hasn't gone in to a lot of detail. It's provided a signpost on circular economy. So if you wanted to look at a lot of detail on that, the London plan has an SPG that deals in a lot more detail on much larger strategic schemes and how you should go about it. I think it's fair to say that we are, to a degree, at the beginning of this journey. I think, as I've said, the document is meant to flag up and provide a more consistent and transparent approach to some of these issues without necessarily providing how we would necessarily deal with them. I think that is something that is still to be developed, certainly in planning terms. I'm sure Terry may have to talk about waste, but certainly in terms of building waste, we recognise this is an issue. It's easy to say it. It's more difficult to perhaps to look at it and decide actually how that issue will be particularly dealt with within the borough. But I think we've just flagged up the principle within this document. We can't go into a lot of detail on what circular economy means. Clearly, for very large schemes, there's a lot more guidance and there's a lot more control through appropriate Section 106 to be able to deal with some of these issues. It would be nice to think that, as already been raised, that all development, be it large or small, to a degree signs up to this. And I think it's fair to say that what we've tried to do is set out best practice and the approach in a consistent way. I don't think we can always demand everything of every planning application, but we would like all developers, whether they be large or small, to at least look at the application and look at the approach that they could adopt. I don't know, Terry, if you want to add to that specifically on the waste side of.
I can just add a little bit around what the council's doing around the kind of circular economy. So obviously we've just procured a new waste contract, and we really did emphasise the waste hierarchy in there. So we're working with Suez on kind of maximising opportunities for the circular economy. So that's really looking at our kind of bulky waste area and what we can reuse of that as well, and other areas where we're looking for reuse. We're also partnered up with LWARB, and we're piloting a kind of a new training academy that they're developing around the circular economy. And I think it's us and Hounslow, which are piloting in that. So that's looking at really embedding circular economy in the council. So it's working with housing, working with adult social care, looking at all the different procurement and looking at all the different opportunities that the circular economy does present to the council, and making people aware of that and trying to really change the way we actually operate. So there's quite a lot the council's doing. It doesn't link directly to the Greening SPD, but I thought it'd be useful for you to know that.
Thank you. Erin Oretti, you wanted to ask.
Thank you very much. Can I just follow up on this one,
Chair? We need to be
just for a second.
Because we're running out of time
yes,
on this.
Very quick. No, because I know actually the academics, because in Imperial College, I am aware of the first professor of waste management, and the other one, another university somewhere else, regarding the circular economy and how it's been applied. So are we reaching out as well to those institutions at our door to collaborate? And that's it, Chair.
Terry, perhaps you could give a quick answer on that.
Majority, there's more work we can do. So I'm more than happy to have an offline conversation with you, Councillor, if you like, and we can see what opportunities are there.
Yeah. And just to add, I have met Imperial in the last few weeks to discuss transport-related issues. So there certainly is a line of communication between us and Imperial.
Nice to hear that. Yeah.
So thank you. And if Terry, I could also pass on our thanks to the officers and crews in the contract who collect 50,000 houses of waste every working day during this COVID crisis. I think is quite a astounding result. So thank you to those who are doing the day job and not just sitting around talking about things like we are at the moment. So thank you to those guys. It's bad weather, COVID, etc. So
can I echo that the team have really hit it for 6 over the winter.
Yeah. Erin Oretti, you wanted to ask a question in this area as well.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the question probably be specifically to Mr. Way about Section 9 in the SPD about retrofitting existing buildings. I'm sure you'll be looking at various new sort of technology or new sort of innovative ideas where we can protect, whether we could reinforce double glazing without changing the fabric, the appearance, or the structure of the property. So some sort of green ways of protecting sound and heating, perhaps. That's just my question.
Can I chip in on that question as well? Because the question I wanted to ask, I don't want to make it a separate one. I'll join in with that one. Is that this SPD, whilst it has got a lot of information that is relevant across the board, really is a planning document, and therefore will only address directly those properties that come up for planning applications. And if you think about the time between now and 2040, or the time that buildings will get affected between now and 2040, we will only touch a very small proportion of the housing stock in Kensington and Chelsea by 2040 in terms of getting them carbon neutral via this SPD as such. That's no disrespect to the SPD, and it has lots of useful information in it. One specific area that Erin did mention, I think that it would be well worth, if you think about the geometric physicality of a average terraced house, of which a high proportion of our housing stock is, the fact is that the windows dominate the heat loss, and the conservation areas dominate most of the council's area and most housing, and therefore the ability to put in double or even triple glazing, or even some new tech to do with photovoltaic gathering through transparent collectors into existing conservation area stock buildings without damaging them, is an area that I think is going to be very important. And therefore, a question I'm posing is, does the Department and Planning, or via another part of the council, actually have a business stream focused on the simple area of double, triple glazing in conservation areas and consulting with resident associations and environment societies, etc., across the borough in terms of acceptability, because I think this is something that we could do now and quickly.
Also, Chairman, just to add up, I mean, that acts as a soundproof as well. I know, because I've heard from residents on Holland Road who are leaving out of Holland Road because they think it's too much noisy. And it's something that, we don't have to change the structure, the appearance, but maybe behind the windows we could bring some double or triple or even quadruple, I don't know how you call it, glazes. Thank you.
Johnny, could you answer that in general terms? Is this something that you wish your officers to have a look at?
I'm very happy to look at it. I think just to cover a few bases over the course of, there's a little window of opportunity here for me to jump in. The Secretary of State has, of course, just agreed the new London plan, which will give us a wider range of more modern policies to tackle the climate emergency. So I think that's a tool that will assist us with the greening SPD. On new development, we'll certainly encourage it to incorporate renewable technologies and efficient build systems, new and retrofit wherever possible. And Will, you made a good point too. I don't think we have a dedicated team at the moment, but we are mindful of thermal loss and are able to point residents to products that work. I'm happy to continue that conversation with you offline and see if we can make progress.
Well, I would like to ask my fellow committee members whether they would agree with my making a recommendation to the lead member that this area of facilitating planning sound, if that's the right way of putting it, improved thermal and sound quality glazing in existing historical housing stock in conservation areas. That's a bit garbled, but you get the gist. Would the committee agree with me that we should make a recommendation to the lead member that he and his officers should consider having a focus study and maybe even some pilot projects developed with developers or housing associations, or even through Doug Goldring's work in the council housing stock? So would me that this is something that could be done quickly and relatively straightforwardly and put out to consultation?
I agree, Chairman.
Okay.
I would agree, but I'd also add that it's very important to retain the beauty of the borough, and that needs to be balanced with the importance of triple glazing.
Yeah, Johnny, sorry, Charlie, I totally agree with that, and that's why I phrased it like that it's how this can be done responsibly and sensitively in conservation areas and historic building assets. Because I think if we, as a council, get ahead of the game and develop something that does work and satisfy what you've quite rightly brought up, that we keep the beauty of those houses correct, and if it's consulted well with resident associations who are assiduous in defence of the inheritance we have as a borough, if we do that and do it quickly and do it properly, we will be given a tool to work the thermal requirements rather than having to catch up later on. And I certainly don't, whilst products are important, I certainly would not want to take many of the current products off the shelf and just bang them in. But there are some technical developments which open doors to something that could be cost effective and sympathetic to historical inheritance. So can we ask our governance officers to come up with a better worded version of what I've just said, to ask the lead member and his officers to look at this with urgency, and with the the amenity societies and resident associations, maybe as a joint working group, to come up with some pilots or guidance that would give the way forward, or at least look at it. And if we can't solve the problem, then be honest about it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Charlie, are you happy with that?
I agree.
Right. Okay. And everybody else. So if we could, governance officers, if we could please record that as a recommendation to the lead member. Thank you. Now, Laura, I saw you had a queue up more recently. Was that to do with this item or the previous item?
this item, but I'm happy to put it in the chat. So it's more for the officers. So
okay,
if they can come back in
Thank
writing,
you.
that's fine.
Thank you very much indeed. If we could move on to A7, which is the electric scooter trial. Now, I'm sure Johnny will also say this, but this is not so much to do, the discussion today I would like to focus on the trial that's proposed rather than the issue we have to do with illegal scooters at the moment. I mean, I'm happy for that to be mentioned, but I don't want to spend a long time talking about enforcement with relation to illegal scooters. That's a separate subject or a parallel subject. So, Johnny, perhaps you would like, if you could introduce this subject generally, and if Mark Chetman could speak also afterwards.
Yeah, I'm happy to introduce this. As members likely know, we wrote to London councils over the summer and indicated our wish to participate in the London-wide e-scooter trial that's upcoming. In coming to that decision, I spoke to the Labour transport spokesperson and the Liberal Democrat councillor on the council, as well as to our amenity society. So I tried to take a balanced view that reflected the wishes of all of our residents. The thing that I did flag in that letter, though, was that there are some quite reasonable anxieties about how e-scooters can operate. And whether they'll be safe and whether the regulation and the enforcement will be there. And we certainly said in our letter that we want to be part of the team that leads on how that can best be done in London. So that's sort of where my focus will be going forward in relation to e-scooters. I really hope they can work in the borough. I think they probably can. That's why we're doing this. But we do need to be mindful of some of the concerns that have been expressed to me already.
Okay, Mark, would you like to add any comments particularly?
Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, everyone. I think actually Caroline de Barbier is on the call, and she wrote the report. So
okay, sorry, I've got the wrong steer. So Caroline de Barbier, if you would like to speak instead. Thank you, Mark.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah, I don't have too many comments other than what Johnny said. Obviously, the paper presents what we know about the potential trial and all the sort of safety and other recommendations that TfL has put in place to help mitigate any concerns about safety. So yeah, it's I think it does go quite a long way in trying to control what people can and can't do on these scooters. So hopefully it will be a successful trial, but obviously the trial runs for a year and all feedback will be considered before any sort of declaration that these things would be permanent fixture on the streets.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Marwan El Nagi, you wish to ask a question here.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's welcoming to try this because it's widely used, but I'm really concerned regarding the monitoring aspects of this trial. How are we going to monitor it? Is there any mechanism as we are going to assign to this trial, which we agreed on over 12 months? How are we going to monitor it?
Johnny, perhaps you'd like to come back, or would Caroline, would you like to?
Might be better if I do.
Okay.
So, in terms of monitoring, are you meaning in terms of usage or safety, collisions, or all of this?
All aspects.
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay,
all of this,
so,
because how we are going to put a monitoring process into place. I'm always concerned with operations.
Yeah, for
so
sure.
how this is going to be translated so we can build a key decision at the end of the trial.
Yeah, brilliant.
Thank you.
So the good thing about this being a sort of coordinated pan-London is that TfL is setting up quite robust systems in terms of monitoring. So all the operators, I think, because these things are all sort of GIS enabled, the operators themselves can track exactly where the scooters have been, who used them at that time, to quite a fine location. So they will have data on all the trips that are undertaken, how many of them start and end in our borough, how many come from outside, how many people just pass through, and also where they are parked within the borough. So that data should be available to us as and when we ask for it. TfL will be collating that, I think. In terms of safety, obviously these things are classified as motor vehicles. So if there were a collision, the police should be informed about that. And we tend to get data on collisions on an annual basis. So there is a little bit of delay before we could see that, but that would be tracked. And I think the operators as well would probably be able to provide us with any reports of damage to the scooters and that kind of thing, not so much a safety issue, but damage to the scooters. And yeah, I think the reporting and the feedback will be quite robustly monitored, from what I understand.
Right, thank you very much.
No
Thank you. Any other members of the committee wish to ask a question on this? My concern is that we make sure, because I asked for and read the draft contracts between the TfL and ourselves and the scooter providers and so on. It seems that whilst the police will be involved, the police are very stretched. They will only be involved if somebody's injured. They won't be involved if there's a collision. And in practical terms, because they are very, very overstretched. They may need to be notified for insurance reasons, etc. But would I be correct in understanding that unless this scheme is policed by the providers of the scooters, that it will not, in layman's terms, be practically policed with a small p?
My understanding, my colleague Neil might be best placed to clarify on this, but my understanding is that the Met Police have been working with London councils and TfL, and I know there is a dedicated team that you can call. We do already for issues like cycling on the footway or close passes, that can be called upon to visit areas that we think are experiencing an issue, and I think they have committed to being available for that if we notice particular streets where these scooters are, or people are using these scooters incorrectly. I think that's right, isn't it, Neil? Neil's there.
Well, yes, Neil Simpson here. Yeah, just to yes, the cycle safety teams are briefed and ready to step into action on enforcement. Should we? Well, they'll be doing it anyway. But if there are particular locations which are of concern to us, we can point them in the direction of them.
Yeah. So that's very much, hoping to catch things before it happens, not just if there's a collision. They'll come and visit. That's a sort of dedicated team that can be called on to discourage.
Whose team is that? Is that police or ours?
It's a Met Police team. Our officers have no powers to sort of enforce against this.
And how many of that team would be dedicated to RBKC in any day?
I don't think it's quite as set out as that. It's a pan-London team.
Okay, how many in London overall?
I don't know. I think there's a team of about 6 of them. And
So
as I say, they
6 officers in 32 boroughs.
as I say, I'm not entirely sure on that
If
because
there's one scooter accident in Chelsea and one in Portobello, they can't be in both places at once.
No. This, as I say, this team is very much, you can call on to help discourage this behaviour by doing sort of visits.
Okay.
The regular police.
They're advisory, but I mean, I live absolutely right next door to Kensington Police Station and know 1 or 2 of the officers, and just because I've lived there so long and they've worked there so long, we sort of met in the street just passing each other, and they basically say that they are so stretched that unless there is a threat to life, or there is a serious threat to property in some circumstances, robbery in progress or something of that sort, they don't have the resources to react. In theory, they're tasked to, but in practice, they're priority resourced to go to areas. I just think this is completely. I mean, I've got to ask a question. The question is, do we think that it's realistic to ask the police to police this? I think the question is, my question is basically, unless the providers self-police, that this will not be policed or not regulated or controlled or not managed, or however you want to put it. Policing is perhaps the wrong term to use. This needs to be self-managed. Now, the absolute id of this is, do we think that the contract that we will be drawing up with a provider will give that onus, put that onus on the provider? A combination of the relationship with us and the relationship they have with TfL. It's a sort of complex contractual arrangement with 2 or 3 contracts that are in place at the same time. And governance on that is going to be complex unless it becomes self. Now, I could see that if the e-scooter provider was really motivated and wished to self-manage this issue of enforcement, that they could do it. I understand that with Bluetooth enablement, they can actually position a parking to within 4 inches and pointing the scooter in the right direction at the right angle and making sure its stand is down and all the rest of it. So they can do it. The question is, does the contract really structure a self-management by the provider? Because if they do that, then I think this could be a brilliant thing. It's more efficient than you or I walking into environmental terms. There'll be less CO2 coming out of us as human beings by being on an e-scooter than we would be by cycling or walking.
Okay, so there's a range of issues there. So in terms of enforcement and collisions, if a collision occurs, the normal police can be called, because they are classified as motor vehicles. My understanding is the regular police can be called and they should attend as they would if there was a sort of serious motor vehicle collision. In terms of policing that, obviously the operators can't do that because they have no powers to do that. They can't take people to court or, you know, do anything like that. But in terms of policing the rest of the scheme, in terms of parking, I think there are robust measures in there because, firstly, because these are motor vehicles, you have to have a driving licence and that has to be provided to the operator before you can become a member and rent any scooters. Sorry, or a provisional licence as well, I think. So you have to be a sort of certain age really to be doing that in the first place.
Can I suggest, in the paper we have assurances that this will be. I think what I'm asking for is that could we be, when you get to the point of this being commissioned and you're entering into the contracting process, could you provide more evidence to this committee that the e-scooters provider will provide the management, the practical day-to-day management for making this to happen? Because you say, for instance, the police have a duty to turn up. A friend of mine had a car accident the other day, quite a serious one in terms of damage to the vehicle and the other vehicle. And the answer down the mobile phone from the police when they dialed 999 was, is anybody bleeding? And the answer was no. Well, in which case, sort it out with your insurance company. End of, click. And that's the real world. So, you know, I think, can we have evidence that written into the contract there will be self-management of this that will not rely on the police? Of course, if somebody gets seriously injured, like with the terrible incident that happened down by near the river, where somebody was killed the other day on a motor bicycle, the police, of course, will come to that, as will the emergencies, the ambulance and all the rest of it. But in the normality of day-to-day near misses and minor accidents and such like, there has to be some way within the contract for best practice to ensure that least occurrence of harm occurs. And I think we need to be shown to have commissioned this contract through the contract we will have with TfL and the scooter providers. If I understand it correctly, there's at least 2 contracts to run this, if not 3. That could we have some more evidence beyond what's in the paper as a feedback following this meeting? I know you're not there yet, but when you do, can you you are going to address it, so could you give us a report and assurance? I've got various hands up. Mark, I think you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just to say, I mean, the point that you make about what happened with the car crash the other day, where there was no bleeding, so the police didn't come. I was thinking the same thing, really, that in relation to cycle hire schemes, including the mayor's cycle hire scheme, but also even just private transport, there isn't really the equivalent expectation of sort of self-management, and I think the cycle hire one is certainly kind of relevant, because there are rules of hire within the Santander cycle hire scheme that you won't go through red lights, ride on pavements, and all the other things, that all the other transgressions that can happen. But we know that they do happen, and you might say, well, that kind of proves your point that self-management doesn't really work. But I just wonder whether it's kind of reasonable to ask any operator to ensure their customers are fully compliant with the law in a way that we don't require of other operators of certainly the cycle hire scheme, but even kind of car hire.
Okay, Mark, I understand what you're saying, but I think we need to get as best practice as we can.
Absolutely, and I think you're completely right that the concern about people using these scooters on pavements in particular, because we know that's what some people do now, every day with privately owned e-scooters. And if there were a way of making it impossible to propel these things along a pavement, then I think that would be really useful. But I just don't hear any evidence that the technology is there yet.
And also, I think, you might wish to look at the lower speed zoning along major high streets, or you may not. There's lots of detail in the contract, which we haven't really got time to discuss now. But somebody else has got their hand up, and I don't know who it is.
I have Councillor Jackson.
Okay, sorry, you were in what was called +19 on my screen. So thank you, Alison. Could you ask your question?
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate really what Will is saying, that, these scooters are very dangerous on the roads and obviously on the pavements for, both sides, pedestrians, cars, everything, because they're low level, and we all know that they're bike bomb, and I know you've got regulations in place, but the enforcement doesn't work, the police is not going to work, and I just want to say that, somebody has got to be accountable for the mess that could potentially happen. The providers have to be made accountable, because as Will says, the police are just not going to do it.
Okay.
I'd like to see, the practical solutions, for a plan to someone safeguarding this new idea.
Johnny, do you want to come back with any comments on this? I mean, I think particular thing I'm asking here is are you happy with any potential either real or perceived responsibility that the council is taking on board here with regard to enforcement and safety?
Well, I think, Will, that the first point to make is that I don't want to talk down our police too much, and I know that the Prime Minister committed to 20,000 extra police officers nationally last year, and hopefully we'll get more bobbies on the beat who can start tackling some of this stuff. But seriously, I think there's an important point about liability that needs to be thrashed out as TfL and London councils and the boroughs work through the contractual side of this. I like you, I would like assurances on that front. I think it's a well-made point, and what I don't want is for that to be a roadblock to participation. So I'm extremely optimistic that it's something that is surmountable, and I hope that the vision of borough, London councils and TfL officers can work through that.
Thank you very much for reassurance. And just to clarify for the record, in case anything I said was misunderstood, I am not criticising the police. I was
sorry. I didn't mean to imply that.
No. But you put it quite correctly. Is that I'm a great admirer of the police and what they do in very difficult circumstances, particularly obviously during the pandemic. But they are stretched so thinly that they have to be prioritised on things that are considered the most important. And faced with a minor scooter accident, and the alternative is something that is, much more serious. That quite rightly, their lords and masters will direct them and prioritise them to the other event. And the reality we've reached now is that unless you are involved in a serious event, the police, although sympathetic, and of course, theoretically, you would expect them to. They in practice can't because of the lack of number of them. So that's just to clarify that. But thank you very much for that. If we could move on then to the paper A8, Carbon Neutrality and Transport Update. So Johnny, I think this is you yet again, I'm afraid.
It is. You're probably getting sick of the sight of me, but
no, we're not.
But I can't get enough of your dulcet tones, Will. No, but
this is a public meeting. Decorum is required.
I know.
Let's move on.
Seriously, shall I introduce A8? This is all of our transport, wizardry. It's the focus of a lot of interest, and clearly it's an important part of the commitment to get to net zero. I think there's some really fantastic and, if not world-beating, certainly nation-leading achievement in there. I think some of the stuff we've done around electric vehicle chargers is incredibly good. We remain one of the top 5, if not top 3, authorities in Britain for the raw number of chargers and per head. We've met our public commitment early to get everybody within 200 meters of them. And we've also introduced emissions-based parking, which is another way that we can incentivize a shift to cleaner vehicles. Elsewhere in the paper, there's good stuff on school streets. We've rapidly increased from as I said before, your brilliant pilot, Will, in Colville to having I think 7 or 8 of them now all over the borough. And there's plenty more besides. So hopefully there's lots of interest to committee members in the report.
Okay, Mark, are there any issues particularly you'd like to draw our attention to before we go to questions?
Thank you, Chairman. No, not really. I think Johnny's covered it very, very well. It's responding to your request for an update.
Don't flatter me. It wasn't that good.
Right. If you don't want to, let's go to questions then. Alison, you wanted to ask a question on this. Alison Jackson.
Yes. Thank you. So cycling, I think, desperately needs some regulation and safety regulation. And in the same vein as the scooter plan, this kind of thought, investment, plan, scrutiny, in terms of regulation from the council. And I'd really like to see that coming. I brought it up a few times. And can you talk to us and me about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Alison, I do think this is one of the things when it comes to cycling that I hear more than almost anything else from local people. Whatever else is said about cycling globally, certainly borough residents have expressed serious concerns about cycle safety in terms of pedestrians and all the rest of it. And I take it very seriously. I think it's a challenging one for us to resolve, and I'm sure Mark and maybe even Caroline can talk to the challenges. But I want you to know that I do think it's an important point, and that I can reassure residents in Riverside that from whom I've had emails about cyclists causing hazard to pedestrians, that it's an important and worthy consideration, and it's one that I'm cited on.
Well, at the moment, it's fairly dangerous and it's sort of unregulated. And that just brings me on to the segregated cycleways. Are they going to be segregated? Because mixing slow, fast and, different directions is just dangerous. And also short-sighted in the sense that lanes will get, jammed. Dated pretty quickly, which means expensive, putting the residents at risk. So those are my thoughts on the cyclists.
Yeah, I mean, can I just say I don't want to pronounce on segregation in any sense, indeed on segregated cycling lanes tonight, but I'm sure that your comments will be noted by decision makers across the council.
Can I make one other point about charging points on this document? Because, I've been contacted by a resident and a few residents that, for example, that if that having a lamppost and you've got to repair it, why not repair it and put in an electric charging unit into it at the same time? So that way you can roll it out. And the number of lampposts that were done last year, you could have rolled out many more than 100 a month. And so, it would have been a much faster process. And the 21 goal would have been reached already. And then the other point is that people are not buying electric cars because you can't charge it. So you've got 3 electric cars in a road. There's only possibly one charger somewhere, around. So, I'd like to see a much faster rollout of electric. It's sort of, urgent,
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you on the urgency point. I think the only thing I draw attention to, to the committee on is that it's not always quite so straightforward as to plant a charger on every lamppost. As far as I'm aware, if there's any subterranean infrastructure within 15 meters of the lamppost, it's not possible actually to install a charger. Likewise, there are certain lampposts that, because of their sort of structure, can't take the weight or sort of can't integrate a charging facility on them. So that's another challenge that is presented to us. A further challenge, in fact, is to do with grant funding. I mean, as far as I can tell, for the most part, we max out on our grant funding, and given the financial headwinds, there's clearly a strategic choice about whether we do want to begin investing more capital into new chargers. I should think that if we were going to do anything like 100 a month, that would be a substantial capital investment, and it may be one that we need to return to. I think more pragmatically, just to reassure members that we are serious about this, I would restate that in 2019-20, I believe we installed more chargers than any local authority in the country, which is I think something that we should all be proud of, notwithstanding that there's a long way to go, and that we should get out there and tell our residents that there are more chargers to come, because there are. Certainly in my plans over the next 12 months, we will be introducing them at the quickest possible rate.
Marwan El Nagi, you wish to ask a question under this item, I believe.
Yes, Chair. Thank you so much. And thank you, Jean, for this ambitious program, because I think the future is electric. I know it's like what happened with the computer when it first came out. It was very expensive in the early 80s. And look, now almost in every household, we have like at least 2 computers, maybe. But anyway, the supercharging, and I'm grateful that you installed a quite fast charger units on my ward, which I always see it fully occupied. And what's interesting, we have it's well signed on Clarendon Road. And sometimes I see really taxi drivers. They park there and charge their cars, which is fantastic. And other car users. And I always see them occupied, which is really good. What concern me is the lamppost charging facilities in infrastructure. I came across one in Ladbroke Road on the lamppost where it's not really visible. And there was one lady parked there, a resident, and she never noticed that this lamppost is actually for charging vehicle. This sign, which I took a picture of, which I'm happy to share it with you, that stated that this lamp column is fixed with a charger for an electric vehicle. Please keep this space free for an electric vehicle to charge. And when I talked to the driver, she said, she apologized, said, I'm sorry, I did not see this, that this is a lamppost for charging. And she's a resident in that street. There is no sign on the ground to indicate that this is an electric charging space. Is there any way you want to make it visible to the driver that this lamppost is designated for electric car? And is there a penalty associated with it? Actually, she came and she thought I was going to give her a penalty. Then I give her my card. I said, no, I am a councillor.
Yeah.
And
you showed some clemency towards her in not giving her a ticket.
Yeah, thank you.
Johnny,
but so what I'm trying to conclude here is how we are going to make for the uptake of these electric vehicles. Is there any plan to make them more visible, more noticeable for drivers?
That's always, yeah. I mean that's always a fine balance between the desire to reduce street clutter and the desire to properly signal, what's going on the street. I'm not familiar with or I can't picture in my head right now the charger to which you're referring, but I'm happy to take a look at it and see if there's something we can do in that instance. And then on rapid charging, obviously there's a strategic question about the balance between rapid and lamp column chargers in the borough, and that's something that we're sort of talking about internally and monitoring.
Johnny, in your internal discussions on rapid chargers, it'd be very useful to have some further feedback, and also to find out whether you've talked with the providers of electric vehicles, because I'm sure that the local representative of Tesla or VW or Renault, to name but a few, will have a view as to how many at what price range they will want to sell into the Royal Borough and the associated surrounding boroughs over the next 3, 6, 12 months and beyond, because they will have a view about what their target is, what their audience is likely to buy, and such like. That would give you needs information to match your provision information, and I'd hope that the trade, industry and trade and their thinking was integrated with your thinking on the provision of chargers.
No, I think that's a helpful point.
I think really a technical question to Mark, who may know, is Mark, have officers talked with the providers of electric vehicles as to what their sales projections in the borough are likely to be over the next 3, 6, 12 months?
At our local level, Chairman, we're not speaking directly to individual manufacturers. Although I do remember when we were first trialling the lamp column chargers, we did have some discussions with Tesla because we were the Royal Borough was one of Tesla's sort of prime markets. What we are doing, though, is following very closely the reports being produced at a kind of national and particularly London level on projections that are being made about both the number of electric vehicles that may be coming onto the market over the next few years, the same sort of time frame you mentioned, but also what that means in terms of the mix of slow, fast and rapid chargers. And one of the things that I alluded to in the paper was that at the moment, we only have 3 of the rapid chargers. Like the one I know best is the one at the bottom of Oakley Street, which always has a taxi attached to it, charging up. So it's very well used. We only have 3 of those in the borough at the moment. And I think, although they seem to have been successful, the issue we have now is that we don't have a ready-made sort of supply of future rapid chargers, because the framework that TfL was operating has now ceased.
I'm looking at there's no way that the council would suggest that it would ever provide cars for people. So the question mark is or petrol stations for people, even before petrol stations are on their way out. It wasn't something that we would want to provide directly as the council. If we're going to have a future where we maybe have less cars on the street, but still a high number of them, and they're going to be all electric, what is the vision in the transport business stream for how the charging is going to be accomplished? And if it's totally reliant on public funds providing these chargers, it strikes me as a very limited model. There are plenty of companies who will be delighted to provide charging facilities for a customer base.
And that is indeed what we have, of course, with, I mean, I suppose the first charging points, I think, that appeared in the borough were the Source London ones. So that's exactly the model you're talking about, where there's no public subsidy. Okay. And in fact, it's the reverse, because they pay us. And if I just have a moment to answer Councillor Al-Nagi's questions about the visibility of the charging points, the Source London charging points, the standalone ones, they do have a designated bay and all the associated signs, so it should be fairly clear to drivers that you may not park in that space unless you're an electric vehicle, unless you're driving an electric vehicle. For the lamp column chargers, it's a totally different approach, where we've been trying to put more of them in because as individual units, they're cheaper. And the idea is that you put enough in that if you don't have to designate bays. There has been some talk about designating bays for the lamp column chargers, but there are quite a few issues with that, which you probably don't have time to go in for now, but there are questions about sort of level playing fields. I'll just say that really. But we do have designated bays for the Source London charging points, and we're still continuing to expand that network, or rather the operator, Source London, is continuing to expand its network with our support.
Okay.
Thank you.
Unless there are any particularly urgent questions, I think we've fairly thoroughly gone through that. As obviously this is a work in progress, and we'll hear more back in the future. With your permission, I'd like to move.
One point, Chairman, if I may.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
With discussions live in the chat, but actually it's relevant to the discussion just now, and I wondered whether the committee did have a take on whether we want to recommend 100% active provision for EV chargers in new development.
That was something that was brought up earlier in this discussion. And as I understand it, I think this came back from John Wade, that the compulsion under planning arrangements is something that's part of negotiation at the time of the conditions on the planning.
John Wade does say that in principle we could do that through the new local plans. So I suppose it's within the committee's gift to recommend that the new local plan adopts that policy.
Exactly. Okay. But that's my question, Chairman.
Okay, and I think we could probably row into that as well, that in light of the new London plan, because I think that will firm that up, we would perhaps recommend that the lead member and officers look at enforcing 100% EV charging in all new developments. Is that, Laura, is that how you wished it worded?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
If other members agree.
Well, I don't see any great dissent to that. So if we could take that as read, we will make the recommendation to the lead member. And thank you, Laura, for bringing that up, because it did come up earlier in the discussion.
Thank you, Chairman.
Unless, in the interest of time, because we are running late, if we could move to item number 9, and under item 9, which is the carbon neutral procurement, I'd firstly like to thank David Hughes for doing a lot of work at the request of this committee to come forward with a paper. I'd also like to emphasise that our request for the paper was to have him show us how the group that he works with can provide the means through procurement of enabling the policies that have been decided by the leadership team to be carried out in practice. This is not, I believe, so much a new area of policy at all that we might even opine about, but is some very necessary internal engineering of a very sophisticated type to make what everybody wants to happen in theory happen in practice. So I think it's fundamental to the progress of the council's work going forward on 2030 and 2040 commitments, particularly 2030. But it is a cross-discipline piece of work of a very high standard. So I'd first of all like to invite Councillor Mary Wheel to say a few words about this paper, and then ask David to take us through the particular points that he wants to emphasise, and then we'll go to questions.
Thank you, Chairman. I suppose I just want to perhaps remind people about what we've done that allows this to take place now. And I suppose that's really going back to our new procurement and contract management strategy. And we've done a lot of work with Terry and his team and the environment team during both the creation of the strategy and from now onwards, and indeed the big latest contract. But the basics of it are ensuring that departments re-tender as a rule to try and deliver better value and have adequate contract management. And that better value may well include and often will include green aspects of of value to our community. We've got much stronger governance now over what we do and much stronger controls, and we've actually now got, which for the first time, a contract list so that we actually and register, so we know what contracts are coming up in plenty of time, and that gives officers plenty of time to build in some green benefits to our procurements as we go along. You know, we've done various things as we've gone, like single-use plastics and living wage, for example, or other examples of social value that we've now started building into those contracts. So now we've got a bit more control, thanks to David and his team and our new head of procurement, Anne-Marie Petty. We're now in a position to really take the next step and be bold and ambitious about what additional value we can deliver through all the contracts as we let them. And I think I'll hand over to David there to talk in more detail about it.
Thank you very much, Mary. And David, would you like to take the floor?
I will. Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Wheel. So this is very much building on the work that Councillor Wheel has been championing in terms of how we bring about this transformation in commissioning and procurement, and very much embedding the commissioning and procurement strategy that was approved by the leadership team last year. So one of the principles in that was for us, the council, to become a trusted commissioner. And for me, how we demonstrate that the council's policies around, you know, green commitments, around social value, around living wage, around modern slavery, and so on, are actually built into the thinking and the activity of commissioning and procurement that we undertake, but also into the decision making that we see coming through to members. So for me, there are a number of key steps which are outlined in the report, which I'll just briefly touch on. So the first is around ensuring we've got a clear understanding. As Councillor Wheel says, we have a contracts list now, we have a procurement pipeline, understanding which of these procurement activities and commissioning activities actually relate to some of the policy commitments the council has made. So we can identify at an early stage where officers need to consider whether it's green policies, whether it's living wage and social value and so on, and build that into the process and the activity they're going to undertake to commission and deliver these new contracts. I think that then gives us the opportunity to make sure when decisions come forward that actually there's a clear rationale there under a responsible procurement umbrella to make sure we're accounting for how we've considered those options as officers and what sort of benefits can be delivered, both in terms of the green policies and in terms of social value and so on in those decisions. So that mapping is the first point to understand our baseline and where we're at and where we can be helping you as members to see, both in terms of scrutiny and in terms of lead members, to see where you should see those things coming through in the decisions that are put forward by officers. The second step is to help with an initial assessment with officers to see where there are potentially impacts now, for example, in terms of the carbon footprint, but also the opportunities to deliver and secure benefits against these policy objectives from new procurements that are undertaken. So it's a bit like the equality impact assessment sort of process, where we take an initial assessment of an activity or policy before we go about introducing it. Again, with this, we want to make sure there's a good assessment to focus on those key areas that we want to be able to drive benefits in terms of the policy commitments from, and not just for new procurements, but actually looking back at existing and long-term contracts to make sure, particularly from a climate change perspective, that we're able to renegotiate and to look at building in additional benefits to those long-term contracts that will go beyond the 2030 commitment that the council's made on carbon zero, for instance. It's very important then from an options appraisal point of view that we help officers to undertake the options appraisals in a proper way, to document them, to demonstrate then to decision makers that they've considered those options and what the benefits or the risks might be. So we know that there will be some instances where there'll be conflicts between different policies. It's understanding how we make sure we get the balance right there. Key then, as in section 524, is very much about training and support and sharing best practice. So this is very much the model with Councillor Wheel's support we're setting up in terms of the strategic procurement team, but also working closely with Terry's team, the climate change team, and other teams across the council to make sure that we not only put the framework in place to make decisions in the right way with these factors considered, but we actually help and support officers to be able to do that in an effective way that leads to good decisions and recommendations, so good recommendations and then decisions being made. So moving on to the governance and decision making. So we've worked with colleagues in legal services. So we're going to be looking at introducing a responsible procurement implications section within key decision reports. So again, lead members, members of the community and scrutiny committees will be able to see at a glance where officers have considered and are building in the securing of policy benefits within the reports that are being put forward. That then gives us the opportunity to track and monitor and report, because again, for me and for Councillor Wheel, I know it's important to demonstrate the impact and the benefit that what we're doing in commissioning and procurement has for the organisation and more particularly for residents, to make sure we're delivering on the policy commitments the council has. So again, in 532, setting out some of the kind of reporting we'll be able to do, because we'll be able to capture this information coming through on the key decision reports. Then I've just set out some of the risks associated with this and the mitigations we believe we have in place, and then in section 6 a very brief timetable to give the scrutiny committee an indication of our next steps and the timescales for getting all this in place. I'm happy to pause there and take any questions.
If I could exercise Chairman's prerogative in this instance, I firstly would like to reiterate my thank you to David. We met first on this at ESSB meeting some few months ago. And I thought your presentation then was inspiring, and you translated that into this paper, which is detailed, much more detailed and much more thorough because of the work that you've put into it. I understand that you've consulted widely with colleagues across the council, and obviously worked with your senior officers and your lead member. So I believe that this is a policy, whilst indicating that there's an implementation programme here to be carried out. I think this has reached a milestone in terms of setting this policy out, or this plan out, because as I said, I think it's got more of the flavour of a implementation programme than it has of a new policy, because as Mary Will said, it actually combines and builds on a number of policies that have already been enacted by the leadership team and the decision-making process. So I think this is where a lot of the component parts have come together, albeit that this is the beginning of the enablement process. So I would like to ask for my colleagues' agreement that we commend this paper as it covers the practicality of enabling existing policies and strategies in achieving, amongst other things, the policy that is set in stone by the council itself of the 2030 carbon neutral commitment, alongside all the other social benefits that you've identified. But this is the one that we're looking at. We're not looking at the whole of your workload. We're looking at the 2030 commitment primarily in the Environment Select Committee. So I would like to commend and also to recommend that this to the leadership team, that this policy, this paper and the programme it exemplifies is carried forward as fast as is possible. I fully understand that there's a lot of work starting with the mapping, as you've hinted at or explained. Now, having said that, in the programme of this, so first of all, if I could get to, is anybody disagree with what I'm proposing, is that we actually commend and recommend that this this paper is carried forward by the leadership team as fast as is practicable. Do I have agreement of my colleagues on that? And then we can make a note by the governance officers to make that recommendation. Does anybody disagree? I don't see any not. So if we could do that, but if I could go on to say that what is very useful in these early stages of a program like this is, as you've identified in your words within the paper, there is a need to identify priorities. There's a need to look at the major drivers of achievement, and in our terms, the major drivers of the 2030 commitment. So what I would like to ask, if it would be possible, would be to pick out of the mapping exercise as a priority one or two areas for initial comparison, rather than us waiting for the complete mapping to happen, that in parallel with the ETHA report on carbon neutral, where is my belief that they will identify the major drivers of the 2030 achievement. And I would be extremely surprised, having seen the background numbers to this, if, for instance, the work on the council's housing stock is not high on the list, if not the top of that list. And there's a well-trodden path already with decisions that have been made and contracts have been placed with regard to Lanc West enablement and the beginnings of contracts to be let with regard to new house build and the conversion of the existing housing stock. So what I'm asking is, could you go away and have a think and come back, if you can't make a commitment now, but if you could commit to looking at, or if we could ask that you look at, a pilot project with, loosely put, Doug Goldring's team, perhaps, to identify either the whole of his program as an overview and a setting out of guidelines as to how it can be approached, or a particular worked example on, say, Lanc West, which is probably the most advanced, where you already have contracts being placed. So that if we had this as a worked up case study, which would need working with those teams as well, we would then have a better understanding as a select committee on how this would be rolled out across the council, because I think that there are going to be areas which are going to be smaller and much more difficult to and take longer to map, and may well either go through at least till June 21 when you've got your target, or may even go beyond that. It depends on how far we cast the net and the brief. I mean, are we going to be talking about HR hiring policies with regard to council officers as to where they live and their carbon footprint before they've even come into work? I mean, that may be a bit beyond the scope, and I think it was on the ETHA mapping a bit beyond the scope. Yeah. But I think that Doug Goldring's work is not only big, it's right at the centre of what we're going to have to achieve. And he's done a lot of work. He and his team have done some fantastic work, not just him, but obviously the whole team there have done some fantastic work, and is right up in front and central in the perceptions of the leadership team, with people like Kim Taylor-Smith on the housing objectives, and Tim Kamali as it was, but now Johnny Thalasitis with regard to the targets for environment. And it would seem to me that we have a ready-made case study that we could actually do useful work now. Even if you aren't able to do your full work on it, that you could inform us as you go through developing your guidelines, because I guess there'll be not hundreds, but maybe many KDs going through on Doug's enablement work on the housing stock. But there will be an overriding guidance and framework to how that works from a procurement point of view, from a housing point of view, and from a 2030 commitment point of view, and how that works together as set out in this paper. You've identified it as risks. And I think that this would be useful as a case study to work through. Dare I suggest that we might be able to get a case study out of adult social care and out of FCS as well. But that maybe is asking too much. But if we could start with a case study in housing with Doug Goldring, maybe we got to ask Doug Goldring as well before we make any commitments.
I'm happy to take that conversation with Doug, Chair, and then come back to you. Absolutely.
Because I think that would enable much more practical transparency to come out of this excellent structural paper, and help us understand how you will develop the programme after the end of our scrutiny committee year, because we would like to have a a grip of how this is going to be worked through, so that we can make observations supporting their recommendations or whatever. So that would be, so there's two parts of what I've said. First is the commending and recommendation to carry things out as quickly as is possible. And secondly, the desire to have a worked example taken forward. So thank you very much.
Indeed. Yeah, thank you, Chair.
So other members of the committee, anybody else like to raise an item on this one, or shall we move on? Somebody's got a hand up, RC. I can't decipher that. Ryan, can you tell me who that is?
I think that's Councillor Round. It might be an old hand.
Is it an old hand, Laura? No answer.
Yes, that is an old
hand.
hand.
Okay.
That's an old hand. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, it's okay. Don't worry. I just don't want to commit the sin of cutting somebody off. So Mary and David, thank you very much indeed for what I believe is a key milestone paper, and we much applaud the work that's been put in. Look forward to making further progress on this. So thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and good night.
Thank you, Chairman.
Good night. Now, everybody else, we've got a work programme to deal with, and then I think that's the end of the agenda. So Ryan, would you like to lead us quickly through work programme?
Okay, so essentially the work programme is a short paper that just sets out what the main priority topics for the Environment Select Committee are in this municipal year, as were agreed when the Overview and Scrutiny Committee met, I believe in September last year. So there are two main themes which have come up in this meeting already. The first being the 2030 and also kind of additional to that 2040 carbon neutrality commitments, and the other main theme being the management of streets and the kind of customer services linking up work that's taking place. Within the work programme, there is also an item on healthy homes, and that is jointly with the Housing and Community Select Committee, which has set up a housing safety and healthy homes working group. And so members of this select committee are meeting in having joint meetings with members of that working group to look at the issue of healthy homes, which is also tied in quite closely to the 2030 carbon neutrality commitment, because it involves the decarbonisation of the housing stock in the borough and the insulation and boiler replacement and so on. So I think with the main purpose of the work programme report is to kind of just reiterate what the select committee is doing this year, and also to give members of the select committee an opportunity to discuss any of the priorities and whether there's anything they want to share or get involved in any of those priorities. Jackie, is there anything else you want to add on? Hopefully I've summarised that correctly, but feel free to chip in, Jackie, if I've missed anything off that you think's worth adding on the work programme.
No, thanks. I think it's up to the committee to discuss it now. Thank you.
Okay, if I could kick off, I think that it'd be worth doing two things at the moment. One is the 2030 net zero delivery. I think we're making good progress on that, but we will be, there's one big component that's missing from an appreciation of how the council is doing on that, which is the carbon neutral plan by Ether. Now, it is not going to be long before that will be out in its first draft. So I will, as soon as I can get a draft circulated to the committee, I think that'll provide a better understanding of a lot of how the council's work will come together, because one of the aspects of the last paper we were talking about with David Hughes was that part of his appreciation of commissioning in the procurement and commissioning in the council overlaps with the mapping that Ether are doing on behalf of the climate sustainability, environmental sustainability and strategic board, because we have the green plan, we have the greening SPD, we have a whole number of other bits of work going on. We have practical work happening by Doug Goldring and others, as we've described. But what we don't yet have is the detailed appreciation of the council itself, current footprint, carbon footprint, and the techs and investments that are going to have to be made by 2030 to achieve that zero results, and therefore the priorities and therefore the ability of us to fill in the dots on scope, pace, and cadence that needs to be achieved to get to 2030. So that's the first thing, is to say that's fundamental to us to be able to take an overview and really draw together some appreciation and structural conclusions with regard to the council's, in other words, our scrutiny of the council's performance with regard to 2030. In terms of management of the streets, I think much that's been listed under planning, which has occurred since we did the thinking of management of the streets, those elements there have a the greening SPD belongs in effect in the first category of net zero delivery, and the Brompton SPD has more to do with the management of the streets. If we rename the management of the streets to the creation and management of the streets, that covers all planning aspects as well. So I think that 2 out of the 3 items under planning policy could go into creating management of streets, and the greening SPD could go into the 2030. Healthy homes also links into the forthcoming fuel poverty paper that's going to the leadership team. And I think that one of the things I'd like to ask Ryan to do would be to recirculate the policy that's going to go to the leadership team, because I want us to have the opportunity of making a comment on that paper. It overlaps to a degree with some of the elements of the greening SPD, and it overlaps with other elements of the work within the housing and communities group, and therefore it's very much to do with the work that Portia Thaxter and I attend with Greg Hammond and his working group under the housing communities. So that's really the progress. I think such things under the healthy homes that's very important is the fabric first that was mentioned under the greening SPD, i.e. that if you're going for a carbon neutral solution to a badly insulated gas-fired heating flat, there are several technical routes that you can go, and if you were to take out the gas boiler and put in a heat pump and support it with greening electricity, you could achieve your 2030 target. But then you might land the tenant or leaseholder with a massive bill in terms of consumption of green electricity, which might be very expensive. So the fabric first, which is putting the first step, and also, the other thing is the market is not mature for heat pumps at the moment, and therefore they're very expensive. But if you put the likely rollout of housing improvement, energy-related funding, which will hopefully come in to supplement the HRA situation. Doug Goldring has already started applying for grants from government to do that. If you put that into the insulation, it gets you nearer to the carbon neutral. And if the tenant or leaseholder can't afford to run a heating system as it exists, they're at least warm rather than freezing cold. So it improves the fuel poverty situation, it improves the robustness of the housing stock, and it leaves the door open to substituting a heat pump for the gas boiler at a later date when the market is mature and they're cost effective and don't have rattly fans anymore that are the bane of some of the restaurant areas in the borough. So I think that the key to the progress in the first one is carbon neutrality. The key to the management of streets is putting together a range of things from CREST conversation we had today to planning policy and other elements. And we have a further working group and I think even a seminar planned under Healthy Homes with Greg Hammond. Now, having got these components more or less in place, what I'm going to be working with Ryan to do is to start trying to structure some of the report that we might put together in the two major ones of 2030 and creating and managing the streets, and then ask for elements of that to be circulated to each one of you in the scrutiny committee, so that you can provide an editorial input and comment into the way these things are being pulled together. So there will be input from officers. I mean, people like David Hughes and Terry Oliver and Doug Goldring and others will help. And then there'll be some editorial structuring with Ryan and myself, and then we'll ask you in turn to take parts of this. You'll see it all. All of you will see all of it, but I'm going to be asking each one of you to act as somebody who gets a bit more involved on some of the detail. And I know from talking to you earlier today and previously that some of you have particular interests in particular areas. That's not to say you can't make comment on anything, but we're going to ask you to focus on certain bits. So rather, as we asked you to lead questions today, we'll ask you to read these draft papers in a bit more detail and come up with solutions with regard to structure, content and presentation. So that's all I would like to say about the work programme. Has anybody got any particular questions they would like to ask at this stage? I'm happy also to discuss this offline with any one or all of you if necessary. Okay, thank you very much. That I think concludes our business for the evening, unless we have any other business that Ryan first. Is there any other business that you would like to bring up?
Nothing that I'm aware of, Chair.
Okay, so to members of the committee, are there any other items that any of you would like to raise at this issue, or can I close the meeting? I take that I can close the meeting. So thank you for being very patient. We've had a long meeting, but a very fruitful one and a very useful group of papers. So thank you to our officers, Ryan and Hannah, for supporting this meeting, and thank you to the lead members and officers who've attended this meeting, and to Jackie and other governance officers too. So thank you all, and good night.